First off, thank you guys for being here this morning. I know it's a long weekend. I know it's super early. Really, really pleased that Joel, Colin, and others asked me to be here. I actually lived in the district for 12 years. I went to GW. That summed up GW right there. That was basically it. I love it. Always great to be back. I came in last night and stuffed myself at Haleo until I slept like the Christ child. So as I mentioned, as Joel mentioned, I actually moved to Atlanta about 4 years ago. Yes, excellent. And I live in a neighborhood right in town called Ponce Highland. It's a made-up neighborhood. I don't know if you guys here have ever heard of Lanier Heights. Also a made-up neighborhood. So similar story there. Atlanta's an awesome town. A lot of great places to live. This is the loft where I live with my wife. Cool interior spaces. So we live here with our cats, our other cats, and our other cats. So I moved down about 4 years ago to help start up AKQA Atlanta. And actually, I'll talk more about my experience at AKQA, but I started here in the DC office, which if you guys don't know is just over in Georgetown and about 100 people big. So my role there is Group Creative Director. We're about 35 people. And we do a lot of work primarily for Delta Airlines. So we do all of their digital products and services. So we do their mobile app, we do in-airport signage, and we actually just launched the in-flight entertainment system, which is going to be rolling across some fleets this year. I'm actually very lucky to have one of my clients from Delta, Jonathan Mayfield, back there. Thank you very much for flying up here. He flies for free, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But you know, this isn't what I'm here to talk to you guys today about. Of course, it's reality, and in particular, of interest to me is how reality intersects with language. Yeah, 10 points for Gryffindor. And to me, the most interesting place this happens is around feedback. Yeah, I don't know what, this picture actually has nothing to do with feedback. I just kind of loved it and wanted to put it in here. So, you know, I wanted to start where all great stories start, which is, of course, Google. And we started with a meme, I suppose, that a lot of us in this room who are on the agency side are familiar with, which is kind of shit clients say. And the internet is full of these things. There's a BuzzFeed article about it, so it's real. And a lot of us have experienced this kind of feedback, everything from, hey, you know, could you make a logo instead of a font? My personal favorite, let's make the button red. And can you up the wow factor? So it's easy for us, and it's fun for us to talk about these things and to laugh at them, because they're funny to us. But what I want to unpack over the next kind of 10 or 15 minutes is there's actually a lot going on behind this type of feedback. And I hope when we look at this again in a few minutes that you'll feel a little bit more, you'll feel differently about it. So I wanted to start this journey where no great stories start, Whole Foods. So I went into Whole Foods at like 8 in the morning to buy wine. And I picked out a very lovely 2013 Chateau Ste. Michelle Merlot. It's very approachable Merlot, I know because the label told me. So I'll read this for you guys in case you can't. A complex yet approachable Merlot, black cherry, leather and spice with layers of rich dark fruit. So I bought a couple of these bottles of wine, and I invited the studio to come and try it. And if you ever need to get people to a meeting, this is an excellent way to do that. So we got everybody together, and I actually had them fill out a form that was similar to what the Whole Foods label looked like. So, hey, give me a description and then check off some attributes for this wine. Amazingly, some people are actually got it pretty spot on. Joe, who was, I say bystander here because he was just like the husband of one of our UX people, just happened to be in the studio and got roped in. He was like, free wine. Got it basically on the nose, which I was super impressed by. Other people were more direct. Others maybe lacked the nuance of language to describe the wine itself. But something interesting happened. Everybody kind of, like 50% of people kind of said like fruity, which was pretty good. But we started to have some disagreements. So here Sean says the wine is wet, where we have other people saying that it's actually very dry. And then you move into people talking about tones that aren't even necessarily there. And then you've got me, who's basically like, yeah, this is wine. So it's interesting to see, again, we're all experiencing the same wine, but we're all articulating our experience of it differently. And this is actually really well shown when we ask people to select the attributes for that particular wine. So again, we took all the things they listed on the Whole Foods label. Here are what the experts said it was, and here's what we said it was. So we got some of it right. But again, it's interesting that you might, it may be accurate to say that it's peppery or earthy, but that's not what the experts have chosen to describe it as. So where this gets, so this is obviously just something we did in our office, but this actually gets really, really interesting when you look at what happens when people try to describe things that they don't have a framework to describe. So in his 2005 book, Blink, by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about a study where experts were asked to rank strawberry jams. So these experts took 5 jams, and as they do, according to taste, texture, and other factors, rank them in terms of overall quality. What the researchers then did was take a random group of college students and ask them to rank the same jams. And the list is actually pretty similar. So, the college students thought the Knott's Berry Farm was, maybe second best, and there was some disagreement about the last two. But overall, these lists actually have a correlation of 0.55, which is really strong, which is basically to suggest that the experts correctly identified what the college students would pick, which is what you pay experts for. Where this gets really weird is that a different group of college students were asked to rank the same jam in the same exercise. The only difference is they were asked to articulate why they were ranking the jams in the order they did. And when that happened, the order totally changed. So the jam that the experts ranked as number 1, the Knott's Berry Farm, actually became number 4 on the college student list. And the one they chose, the experts said, was the worst, became number 3. So basically what's happening here is in the process of these college students trying to fumble out words to describe kind of what they think a good jam is, they kind of psych themselves out. And it really wound up kind of messing with their perception of reality. So again, they wouldn't have put this in the order that they did if they hadn't been asked to describe it. So again, the correlation between these two lists is now 0.11, which is basically nothing. Like, it has nothing to do with what the experts suggested. So what I'm kind of proposing here is that this notion of feedback, when you don't have the proper framework to articulate that feedback, you don't have the words to articulate that feedback, is a very slippery slope. Sometimes you can be, direct and say something is okie as fuck, or you could wind up saying something that's totally wrong, even if your experience of it is correct. So when you think about something like this now, when a client says, okay, like, hey, can you maybe make, a design instead of a font, what are they really trying to say? Maybe it's that the design feels unfinished, or the typography is the wrong weight, or it needs to be treated in a different way. So again, I titled this font is too small, because sometimes when the client says the font is too small, they mean they don't like the layout, or the contrast is bad. And it's our job as professionals to help them kind of, read the tea leaves, as it were, to figure out what they're trying to say. Because it's really hard, and I know because I had to kind of learn on my own, not on my own, but I had to learn how to take, it was a very mechanical process, and make it internal. So to Joel's point about not showing an old picture, here you go. This was 2005. So I started at AKQA in 2005, and I actually didn't start on the creative side, I started on the development side of the house. So I came up through, as many of us did at the time, through ActionScript, the snakiest of all programming language. I don't know, apparently this is a side story, sorry guys. The author actually gets to pick the animal for these books, which I think is super cool. Sadly, axolotls are already taken. So I did a lot of great work early on in Flash development. So this is some of the works for ESPN. Some of you guys here locally may have seen the work for Postal Service. But what happened eventually is, because, again, the nature of Flash, and I found myself earlier in meetings and in the brainstorming process, somebody finally turned to me and said, okay, so you do it. And that's how I became creative. I remember distinctly my first project was a video game marketing site for The Force Unleashed 2, which was from LucasArts. We built, as was the time, a pretty cool and immersive Flash website. And I remember getting early comps for this. And I'm paraphrasing, but my feedback was probably like something like, oh, those bubbles are cool. Could we make them cooler? So what happened was, basically I was now in a position where I had always judged design, typography, layout, color silently, but I was now in a position to have to judge them critically. And so what I had to do for myself was literally make a list that I could run through. So it started with, hey, are there as few fonts as possible? Because I heard that was a good thing. Are there as few colors as possible? And are things kind of lined up enough? And I would look at a design, and I would run through this list in my head. Of course, I wouldn't say any of that loud because I had to be cool. And it eventually, what happened is that list kind of became internalized, and it grew. So, does the design fit with the conceptual direction? Is the client going to feel that this fits with their brand? So what started as a very mechanical process became very ingrained. I still run into areas where I don't have the language to describe what happens, and I call this my design cliff. And this particularly happens around color. I have an awful sense of color, and so what happens is I actually have to go and grab like our art director and be like, dude, help me out. Like I got nothing. That's basically that was exactly the conversation that happens as I was struggling to find the words to describe it. What I realized when I was going through this process of putting together this presentation and talking about external frameworks and making them internal is that I had actually seen somebody else do this in a really up close and personal way, but in a way that was much more profound. So this is my wife, Christina. Actually, a lot of folks in the room know her. We actually met at AKQA. I am fond of telling people that's the danger of workplace relationships, is you may find yourself happily married in 10 years. Careful. In 2011, my wife was diagnosed with something called borderline personality disorder. It is an extremely complex and complicated mental illness. And it is, at best, it's misunderstood, and at worst, it's confused with something like psychopathy or sociopathy. And there are a lot of aspects to this disorder, but one of the fundamental aspects of this disorder is these people have trouble regulating their emotions. So, for example, somebody who's able to regulate their emotions kind of normally, instinctually, they might get mad and then cool off in, if it's a real big deal, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Somebody with borderline personality disorder gets upset. It might take an hour, it might take a day, it might take a week. And if left unchecked, it can be very destructive and actually even lead to self-harm in some cases. So for much of the 20th century, people with borderline personality disorders had no options. They were basically considered untreatable. Doctors wouldn't take them because they were considered too much of a risk factor. People with this disorder are often accused of being manipulative, conniving, unstable, which in reality, they're none of these things. My wife is none of these things. And it wasn't until the 70s that this woman came along. Her name is Marsha Linehan. And she created what I would think of as a really transformative system called Dialectical behavioral therapy. It's also known as DBT. So she did, it's a masterwork. It is truly an amazing piece of work. And what it does is takes things like emotion and takes things that maybe I take for granted in my emotional processing, and gives people an external framework through which to understand their emotions. So again, I get upset, I run through a whole series of steps kind of in the background that I don't even know are happening. But for somebody with borderline personality disorder, they don't have that kind of system built in place. So Marsha Linehan created an external system for them to use. So I'll give you an example of kind of how this works. Let's say you and I were booking a trip, and I asked you to get the Airbnb, and you didn't, and you waited a long time, and now we've got crappy Airbnbs to select from that are way too expensive and not in a cool hipster neighborhood. So DBT starts with, this is again just one of many examples. I might be mad, and we start with the basic question, okay, so I'm angry with you that you didn't book it. Does my emotion fit the facts? So does my emotion accurately reflect the situation? Well, in this case, I asked you to do it, you didn't do it, so yeah, I'm mad, and that's okay. Like, that's absolutely what's supposed to be happening right now. I get to then ask myself, is that emotion effective? And what does that mean? So if I'm mad and I want to get to a certain result, is that going to help me get there? Well, if I think that me being mad at you is going to get you to book the Airbnb, yeah, it's effective. But let's say, for example, that, all right, you'd waited a while, and your credit cards got stolen or frozen or something like that, and you basically had no way now to book this trip. This is no longer an effective emotion, and now I have a whole series of different acts I take. I could basically now, I don't want to react to my anger because it's not effective, it's not going to get us anywhere. And I can consider what DBT calls opposite action, which is basically a series of steps you could take to like kind of cool your anger and change your perspective. Now, going back up to the top of the tree, let's say I got mad at you and you were like, dude, bro, like I asked you to book it. Don't you remember? And I was like, ah, shit. You did. My emotion, my anger at you no longer fits the facts because you asked me to book it and I forgot. So no, is my anger effective? Is it going to get us anywhere? No. So I have to now kind of change my thoughts on it and then turn my emotion now to an emotion that fits the facts, and I can kind of run down this tree again. Now, I'm going to skim over the yes branch of this because this scenario almost never happens. You're almost never, an emotion almost never not fits the facts, but it is effective. That almost I actually can't even think of an example. But what this does, so people with regular, proper emotion regulations run up and down this tree all day, every day, and you don't even realize it. So early on in her kind of skills training, my wife would literally, she would get out her book and she would look at this tree and talk with me about it. She said, all right, I'm feeling upset or I'm feeling sad. How do we resolve this situation? So she had an external framework that she worked with for long enough that it became internalized. And it was a profound change for her. It was a profound change for us. The other aspect of DBT that I think is worth talking about for this crowd in particular is this notion of validation. Fundamentally, one of the fundamental aspects of DBT is to declare that all emotions are valid, which is to say all emotions have inherent worth. So I might be mad about the Airbnb, and it might not fit the facts, but I'm still mad, and that's okay. Validation for people with borderline personality disorders is profoundly important because, well, nobody knows exactly what causes this disorder. One of the aspects that people think contribute to it is invalidation, severe invalidation as a child. I'll give you an example. Imagine you're a kid and you say, I'm hungry, and then the adult in the room says, no, you're not, you just ate. What do you do with that? You have an experience, and then you're being told you're not having that experience. So now, if you're a parent and you've done this occasionally, your child, don't panic, like it's not. People are like, oh shit, like it was just this morning. Don't worry, it's okay. It's all right. It's really, this has to be a severe and ongoing thing and combined with other factors as well. But it is interesting as soon as you start to understand validation and think about it, how important it is for people. So again, if I'm upset, start by acknowledging and validating my emotion. I understand that you're upset. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you're upset? What steps can I take to help you feel less upset? This is not only powerful for somebody with borderline personality disorder, it's powerful for everyone. This is a great way to start a conversation with your colleagues. It's also a great way to start a conversation with your clients. So if your client doesn't like your design and they feel angry about it, that's a valid emotion. You might disagree with it, but it's a valid emotion. And so start with understanding, look, I understand that you're upset that this is the design direction that you wanted. Can you talk to me about that? And how can we resolve it? It's crazy. It takes 10 seconds to do, and it will totally transform the way you have conversations. So next time, client asks for something snazzier, pause for a moment, and I hope I delivered on my promise that you think now the next time you see something that a client, like shit client says, think a little bit about the difficulties that they have in articulating the reality. Because remember, this is 100% of our jobs, and it's 2% of theirs. Of course we can't expect them to be articulate, as articulate, I'm sorry. Sorry, Jonathan. That was good. It's good that you're here. But in the same way that if you don't drink wine and you don't practice talking about it, of course you're not going to be able to, you're not going to line up with the experts. And so, again, it's our job to be compassionate and empathetic in those situations. So I want to leave you kind of with three pithy points, because that's the tradition. The first is just remember that point. Remember the jam. Remember that it's difficult to articulate feedback if you're not used to doing it. Help people articulate that feedback and think about when they give you feedback, what are they really trying to get at? And more importantly, remember that sometimes asking people to articulate feedback in a direct way is dangerous. Not dangerous, but it can give you counterproductive results. So That's why, for example, prototypes are great, because you're not asking somebody to think about a design in the abstract. You're giving it to them. They can play with it, and then they can give you feedback as they go. You're not stopping the room, putting somebody on the spot and be like, what do you think about this design screen right now? Go. Because that's extremely stressful if you're not used to doing that. I'm not saying like fire your clients, but when you come back from a meeting and you're like, oh, well, the client didn't like it. Who didn't like it? What person in the room didn't like it? So don't think about the client as, we don't work for big companies. We work for people. And those people have their own range from, leathery to this is wine. So it's important for us as professionals to be able to understand who said it, because then you can get at why they said it and what they really mean. And the last thing is just to say that feedback feeds back. So if there's something that you want to learn to talk critically about, whether it's professionally, whether it's food, whether it's for fun, whether it's being able to talk with somebody about your relationship with them, it's okay to start with a mechanical system. Sometimes we think that's cheating. It's not. Start with something and eventually work on it, and it becomes internalized. And it can have a profound effect for you, and it can have a profound effect on your reality. Thank you.